the best way to salt your steak? Let's find out together as we turn up the tasty. Salt and meat is a combination as old as time. As a matter of fact, you could probably argue that the salt is older than the meat, generally speaking. I mean, salt is the oldest thing in anyone's household. And we've done some experiments with this. One of our most popular videos explored when to salt your steak, 1 minute, 1 hour, or 1 day prior to cooking it. And in that experiment, the steak that was salted for 1 day in advance was the clear winner. It tasted absolutely amazing. But we got a lot of comments on that video. Well, you didn't try salting the steak after you cooked. Well, we're here to sort of address that question. We didn't think it was really fair to salt 1 day and then salt one day before cooking and then salt right afterwards. So we're just going to be real practical about this. Let's face it, if you're a bad meal planner like I am, you don't even think about salting your steak 1 hour before cooking because we're all busy. So we're trying to look at this in a practical way. Like, you're ready to cook. Do you salt right before you cook the steak or right after? So that's what we're going to do. Here we have 2 beautiful ribeye steaks. Take a look at that. They look absolutely tremendous. And we have salt. That's all we're using. Now, we're on the steak that we're salting before we cook, we're using a tablespoon of salt. I think I'm going to lose about 50% of the salt to the grill. This is the steak we're going to salt once it's done cooking, and I'm using half a tablespoon of salt, again, thinking I'm gonna lose half of this. So let's get salting. And I think this should be about the right amount. Okay, flip it over, go on this side. Yeah, I mean, that looks about right. As you can see, I'm already losing some to the side of the plate, stuff that isn't quite hitting. It should be noted that we are using kosher salt. That's really what I like to use when I cook. You don't want to use table salt. It's going to be kind of dense in its application. Okay, that looks about right. This one gets no salt until it's done cooking. Follow me. All right, we got the grill set up. This is always set up for 2 zone. We're going directly over the heat first with the salt. Oh, can you hear that sound at home? Can you hear that steak sear? That is the sound of tasty. Next up, we're going here on the steak with no salt at all. We're gonna let these cook until they get to a nice internal temperature of about a rare to a medium rare. And then my favorite part, test the results. All right, these steaks are done and they look absolutely tremendous, but I know that this one over here has salt. Matter of fact, you can even kind of see some of it, and this one doesn't. As I mentioned over here, I have half a tablespoon, and I'm just going to get this on the steak. And for a fair experiment, I'm going to salt both sides. I mean, this feels like it's about the right amount of salt, maybe a little much, but we'll find out when we do the taste test. Back on the other side. There it is. All right, let's cut them open, see how they look. There we go, right in the middle. Not a very thick steak, but a good color. Tried to pull them off right at about 120 degrees. And leave that, and over here, also a good color on that one as well. If you guys can see that at home, go ahead and go right in the middle, cut up a couple manageable bites, though that is not my specialty, manageable bites. All right, let's do the same over here. First, I'm gonna go with the salted steak. The one that was salted before it was cooked. That's the steak I'm used to. That's the steak I know. Should taste like I expect it. It's a good steak. You know, I think that is one of the things that we learned on our last salt experiment is that when you bite into something like this, it has an exterior saltiness, but when you salt it for at least an hour, what happens is first it draws that moisture out of the steak, and then that moisture goes back in. So you get more of an edge-to-edge saltiness through the bite. Very good steak. I could finish the whole thing. Before I head over to this side though, a little cleansing of the palate, if you will. All right, here we go. Great little bite, look at that. See if there's any difference. Let me try another one. Before I give the review, let me try another bite. Maybe I'll have to do the 1 bite steak review channel. Everybody knows the rules. Just kidding, I had to do that, guys, I had to. I'm sure the way I hold this fork right now is upsetting some of you guys, but look, I'm just eating on camera. I'm doing my very best. I mean, look, it's close. It really is. Let me just try going for another bite. Let me just Let me just take a look. It's a good bite. Yeah, I mean, this one is more mild, right? Like, I really feel like this is a great tasting steak. I'm getting the beefiness of it, right? Like, that's what's hitting me here, is beefiness followed by salt. What I'm getting over here is a little different. Let me actually go from a different bite. Let me just go from a different slice. Let me try this part right here. Just in case I'm getting a bite that's maybe over-salted. You know, there was a difference in the amount of salt I applied to each one. Now, was that the right way to do it or not? I really don't know. It made sense to me that I was going to lose some of that salt on the grill. But with that said, as I'm looking at the steak, I can still see the salt sitting on top of the steak. Right here, I can still see it, it's right on top. I don't know if the cameras are gonna pick it up, but it's like sitting there right on top, and I think my initial gut reaction is that this one's actually a saltier bite than this one. This is a saltier bite. Is it because I used more salt? Maybe. It's, to some extent, there's almost like no distinction because you can see the salt sitting on top. Now, I would say if I had to choose between these two particular steaks, frankly, this is not at all what I was expecting. Not at all. I thought this would be the saltier steak, and it's not. If I were gonna choose between these two, I would go salt after cooking my steak. I think it's pretty clear. This one is just a saltier bite. Again, maybe it's because I used more. Maybe I'm really splitting hairs. I fully expected, as I've always done when I'm in a rush, to salt my steak prior to cooking. But after tasting this, I think I would salt after cooking. Now, with all that said, maybe the next step of the comparison is to do that 1 hour before that one day and compare it to after cooking the steak. Maybe that's where we need to go next. Because in that experiment, it was very clear I preferred the 1 day salted steak, and even the 1 hour was better than the 1 minute, which is what I'd call this, 1 minute before cooking. But no, guys, I'm shocked. Very rarely am I shocked at the end of this. I'm very surprised. The steak salted after cooking was the better steak. How do you guys salt your steak? Let me know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. I mean, I would love to run this test by like 50 different people. What do you think I did wrong? Do you think that the 2-to-1 ratio of salt was too much? Do you think that's what's impacting the flavor of this steak? I don't know. I don't know. But to me, it feels like this and tastes like this is the better steak. And I also think that there's this other advantage to salting after you cook, is you can salt it to your liking perfectly as you like it, right? Whereas maybe going on like I did, you're at home thinking you're gonna lose some of the salt, right? But for me, I mean, if I'm in a rush, I'm salting my steak after I cook. Them's the results, guys. I'm shocked.
So you didn't like the saltier bite?
It was a little too salty, I would say. This was a much milder bite over here.
And the salting after cooking appears as though the crust is a little crunchier because of the heat source, which is not.
It's not perfect, right? It's a grill. There's going to be some variables when you grill, right? Now, I would say maybe this one has a little bit more color, but as I'm biting into it, I don't notice any of that.
And the texture you haven't talked about. You just talked about the saltiness. So the texture doesn't. There's usually like a crispy, crunchy exterior on your steak, but you didn't mention that at all.
Everyone, look, a nice steak crust makes it look pretty. Those sear marks are gonna make it look really nice, but texture-wise, they were the same. I admit maybe this has a little bit better color, but then you'd maybe say, well, okay, even around the top, maybe they got a little too much color. I had no bitterness biting into this part of the steak, but no, tenderness, it tasted like a ribeye. Delicious, amazing.
And you thought the steak that you ended up seasoning twice as much because of the loss of the grilling was too salty. So I'd love to see a 1-to-1.
Maybe it's a 1-to-1. Maybe that's where we go next. I felt like this, and I tried to take a different bite of the steak over here, guys. Talking to the wizard off camera, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking to. This is the guy who makes me look somewhat good on camera. I mean, as good as I could possibly ever look. No, I mean, this was a saltier bite. It was, I would almost say too salty.
In the 60 years we've been working together, you have never said something's been too salty.
Never have I ever said it's been too salty, but it also felt about like it was the right amount of salt that I applied to that steak.
how you usually would.
How I normally would, yeah. But so I don't know. Again, I would think that if I'm going to try this, and I will be trying this again as I cook my steaks, if I don't have the time, I think I'll be salting afterwards, because you can apply it to taste. You don't have to run the risk now of adding too much before.
And do you think that if you just had the seasoned before grilling steak on its own, you would think it's too salty? Is it only too salty compared to the other one?
That's a great question. I mean, compare and contrast, right? I mean, take another bite. I mean, we're right here. The steak's right here. I mean, we go for a different bite completely.
Because when you first had that
No,
bite,
that's not too salty. That's not too salty.
and when you had that first bite, you didn't say, "Ooh,
I
it's
didn't
too
think it
salty."
was too salty. I thought it was too salty in comparison after I had this one, which I don't know. I thought on this one, simply put, the salt shined more on this one, but the beefy flavor was better on this one. The first thing I noticed on this bite was the salt. The first thing I noticed on this was the beefy flavor of the steak. So.
Excellent. And you want to find that balance between beefy flavor and...
You want the balance. I mean, that's why you spend all the money on this ribeye, right? It has a nice beefy flavor, tons of fat. As you hear me say every video, the fat is where it's at. That's where beef meat in general gets a lot of its umami flavor. Who's mommy? It doesn't have anything to do with anything. I just like the way it rhymes, but that umami is that richness, right, to the steak. And yeah, I mean, texture-wise, flavor-wise, they're both similar, with the exception of I led with the saltiness on the bite here, and this one led with the beefiness, followed by the salt, and that would be opposite of what I would have thought going into it. So,
Love it. Can't wait to see the one-to-one.
well, you're gonna have to try it off camera.